In the quiet moments before history holds its breath, there are always the ordinary people living ordinary lives who are about to be swept up in something extraordinary. We often see the statues, hear the grand speeches, and remember the names carved in stone. But what about the names that are whispered? The ones known not for the glory of a final heroic stand, but for the desperate, selfless race against time to prevent one. This isn't a story about a medal ceremony or a victory parade. This is a story about a man who ran toward the fire, a man whose defining moment was a race he was never meant to win, but one he had to run all the same. We're going to talk about Dan Healy. Now, that name might not be as instantly recognizable as some of the others associated with the tragic events of Operation Red Wings, but his story provides a perspective that is profoundly human and just as essential. It's a story about what happens when the call comes and you drop everything to go and save your brothers. To truly understand the crucible that forged Dan Healy's defining moments, we need to step back into the summer of 2005. The global war on terror, ignited by the September 11th attacks, was in full flame. Afghanistan, a land of stark, breathtaking beauty and brutal, unforgiving terrain, was a central theater of this conflict. For the American Special Operations Forces, particularly the Navy SEALs, this was the front line. The enemy was elusive, a shadowy network of Taliban fighters and al-Qaeda operatives who knew the mountains like the back of their hands. The Korengal Valley, in the Peach District of Afghanistan's Kunar province, was a place that had earned a grim nickname, the Valley of Death. It was a 6-mile-long gash in the earth, a place where the mountains themselves seemed hostile to outsiders. The local population was a complex tapestry of tribes, some sympathetic to the coalition forces, others deeply loyal to a local warlord named Ahmad Shah. Shah was a key target for the American military, a man responsible for a series of attacks on U.S. and Afghan government forces. Taking him out of commission was a high priority. This was the world Dan Healy inhabited, not the world of headlines and policy debates, but the tangible, visceral world of dust, sweat, and the constant low-humming tension of being in enemy territory. The SEALs who operated here were a unique breed. They were the product of some of the most grueling military training ever devised, a brotherhood forged in the freezing surf of Coronado and the blistering heat of the desert. They were intelligent, resourceful, and possessed a quiet confidence that came from knowing they were among the most elite warriors on the planet. But they were also just men with families back home, men who shared inside jokes and griped about the food, men who dreamed of a cold beer and a soft bed. They were professionals, but they were also sons, husbands, and fathers, and it was this bond, this sense of family that would be at the very heart of the tragedy to come. Operation Red Wings was conceived as a high-stakes mission to neutralize Ahmad Shah. A 4-man SEAL reconnaissance and surveillance team was to be inserted covertly onto the slopes of a mountain named Sautalosar, overlooking a village where Shah was believed to be operating. From this vantage point, they could observe and identify him, paving the way for a larger force to move in. It was a classic special operations mission, high risk, high reward, and entirely dependent on stealth and precision. The 4 men chosen for this perilous task were Lieutenant Michael Murphy, Petty Officer 2nd Class Danny Dietz, Petty Officer 2nd Class Matthew Axelson, and Petty Officer 2nd Class Marcus Luttrell. They were some of the best the SEALs had to offer. What no one could fully anticipate was how quickly their carefully laid plans would unravel, and how a desperate plea for help would echo through the mountains, reaching the ears of men like Dan Healy. Dan Healy's journey didn't begin in the mountains of Afghanistan. It started in the quiet, quintessential American town of Exeter, New Hampshire. Born into a family with a legacy of service, his father, Daniel Healy Sr., was a respected physician. Young Dan was a charismatic and driven individual. He was a standout athlete, a leader on the football field at Exeter High School, a place where he was known for his tenacity and his infectious spirit. But there was something else stirring within him, a call to a different kind of life, a path less ordinary. While his peers were charting courses for college and conventional careers, Dan was drawn to the challenge and the mystique of the Navy SEALs. It was a decision that spoke volumes about his character. He wasn't seeking comfort or accolades. He was seeking the ultimate test of his own limits. The SEALs represented the pinnacle of physical and mental endurance, a brotherhood where individual ego was subsumed by the needs of the team. This resonated with the very core of who Dan Healy was. He enlisted in the Navy in 1990, and from the outset, he was on a singular trajectory. He set his sights on basic underwater demolition dodge SEAL training, or BUD-S, the legendary 6-month crucible designed to weed out all but the most resilient. BUD-S is more than just a training program. It's a psychological and physical gauntlet. The infamous Hell Week, 5.5 days of continuous brutal training, with a maximum of 4 hours of sleep in total, is where most aspiring SEALs wash out. But Dan Healy thrived. He pushed through the pain, the cold, and the exhaustion, his resolve hardening with every challenge. He emerged from BUD-S a changed man, a member of an elite fraternity, a Navy SEAL. He was assigned to SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 2, SDVT-2, a specialized unit that operates the SEAL delivery vehicles, mini-submarines used for clandestine underwater operations. This was intricate, high-stakes work, requiring a unique blend of technical skill and warrior ethos. For over a decade, Dan Healy honed his craft, deploying to some of the world's most volatile hotspots, including Bosnia and Kosovo. He rose through the ranks, earning the respect of his peers and superiors alike, eventually becoming a senior chief petty officer. By 2005, Dan Healy was a seasoned veteran, a leader in his unit. He was in Afghanistan, deployed with SDVT-2, when the call for Operation Red Wings went out. It's important to understand the structure of the SEAL teams in theater. While the 4-man reconnaissance team led by Michael Murphy was from SEAL Team 10, the broader operation involved assets from various units. Dan Healy and his team were part of the Quick Reaction Force, or QRF, a group of highly trained operators on standby, ready to respond to any emergency. On the morning of June 28, 2005, the unthinkable happened. The reconnaissance team on Sotalosar had been compromised. A chance encounter with local goat herders had forced them into a terrible choice: release the civilians and risk them alerting the Taliban, or execute them and violate the rules of engagement and their own moral compass. They chose to let them go. Within an hour, they were under a ferocious, coordinated attack from a much larger force of Ahmad Shah's fighters. Pinned down on the treacherous mountain slopes, they fought for their lives with incredible courage, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and in a desperate situation. Back at the forward operating base, the radio traffic was chilling. Lieutenant Murphy, in a final, heroic act, exposed himself to enemy fire to get a clear satellite phone signal to call for help. His call was a lifeline, a desperate plea for reinforcement and extraction. For Dan Healy and the other members of the QRF, this was the moment they had trained for their entire careers. There was no hesitation, no debate. Their brothers were in trouble, and they were going to get them. The urgency was palpable. 2 MH-47 Chinook helicopters, massive twin-rotor aircraft, spooled up. One, call sign Turbine 33, carried a crew of 4 from the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. the legendary Night Stalkers, and a contingent of 16 special operators, 8 Navy SEALs and 8 Army Night Stalkers. Among those 8 SEALs was Senior Chief Petty Officer Dan Healy. He was the commander of this rescue force. At 36 years old, he was one of the most experienced men on that aircraft, a leader stepping into the breach. There's a little-known detail that speaks volumes about the man. As they were preparing to launch, a fellow SEAL, a close friend, saw Healy and was struck by the look on his face. It wasn't fear, but a steely, focused determination. They exchanged a look, a silent acknowledgement of the immense risk they were about to undertake. It was a look that said, "We're going to get our guys." It was a promise, a sacred vow between brothers in arms. This wasn't just a mission, it was a rescue. And for Dan Healy, there was no other choice. He was a SEAL, and SEALs don't leave their own behind. As Turbine 33 lifted off, its rotors churning the Afghan air, it was flying not just into a combat zone, but into a crucible of courage, sacrifice, and ultimately profound tragedy. The air inside Turbine 33 was thick with a mixture of adrenaline and focused resolve. 16 of America's most elite warriors, men at the absolute peak of their profession, sat in quiet contemplation, checking their gear, their minds racing through the mission parameters. Dan Healy, as the senior enlisted SEAL on board, bore the weight of leadership. He was responsible for the men around him, and for the 4 men they were desperately trying to reach on the mountain below. The flight to Sautalosar was a nerve-wracking journey through some of the most treacherous flying country on Earth. The massive Chinook helicopters had to navigate narrow valleys and hug the rugged terrain to avoid detection. The pilots of the 160th SOAR were the best in the world at this kind of high-stakes, low-altitude flying, but the risks were still immense. As they approached the last known position of the embattled SEAL team, the plan was to insert the rescue force via fast rope. This is a technique where soldiers slide down a thick rope from a hovering helicopter, allowing for rapid deployment in areas where landing is impossible. It's a dangerous maneuver even in ideal conditions. In a hot combat zone on a steep, uneven mountainside, it was fraught with peril. The 2 Chinooks arrived in the vicinity of the firefight. The lead helicopter, carrying another SEAL element, made a pass to assess the landing zone. The enemy fire was intense. The decision was made that the landing zone was too hot, too dangerous for an insertion. They were ordered to pull back and find a safer spot to set down. But time was a luxury they didn't have. Every second that ticked by was another second their brothers on the ground were fighting for their lives. A debate, born of desperation and the warriors' imperative to act, took place over the radio. The men in Turbine 33, including Dan Healy, knew the risks, but the pull to get to their teammates was overwhelming. A revised plan was quickly formulated. They would attempt to insert at a slightly different, hopefully more protected location. Here we encounter one of those moments that historians and military analysts will forever debate. In the heat of the moment, with incomplete information and the lives of their comrades hanging in the balance, a calculated risk was taken. Turbine 33, with Dan Healy and his team aboard, moved into position to deploy the rescue force. As the massive helicopter hovered, preparing to drop the fast ropes, it presented a large, slow-moving target against the mountainside. The Taliban fighters, deeply entrenched and waiting, saw their opportunity. An insurgent, likely armed with a rocket-propelled grenade, an RPG-7, took aim. What happened next was a moment of shocking, instantaneous violence. The RPG, a weapon that has been the bane of helicopters for decades, struck Turbine 33 in its most vulnerable point. The aft transmission just below the rear rotor assembly, the explosion was catastrophic. The Chinook, A machine of immense power and resilience was mortally wounded. It lurched violently, its rotors ceasing to turn. For a brief, horrifying moment, it hung in the air, a broken giant, before plunging towards the ravine below. Inside the aircraft, there would have been no time to react, no time for final words, just a sudden, violent end. The crash was devastating, a massive fireball erupting as the fuel and munitions on board cooked off. All 16 men aboard, 8 Navy SEALs, and 8 Army Night Stalkers were killed instantly. Senior Chief Petty Officer Daniel Healy, the man who had rushed to save his brothers, had made the ultimate sacrifice alongside them. The loss of Turbine 33 was a staggering blow. In a single horrific moment, the death toll of Operation Red Wings had climbed from a potential handful to 19. It was the single largest loss of life for Naval Special Warfare Forces since World War II. The rescue mission had become a tragedy of its own. On the ground, the lone survivor of the original 4-man team, Marcus Luttrell, witnessed the helicopter go down. In his memoir, Lone Survivor, he describes the sickening feeling of watching his hope for rescue turn into an even greater disaster. He knew what that crash meant. His brothers were gone, and now he was truly alone. The emotional impact of this loss rippled out from that remote Afghan mountainside across the globe. For the families of the men on board, the news was a shattering blow, a nightmare from which they would never fully awaken. In Exeter, New Hampshire, the Healy family, a family that had given so much in the service of others, was confronted with an unimaginable grief. Their son, a man of immense courage and quiet strength, was gone. But in the midst of this profound sorrow, there were also stories of the men themselves, testaments to the lives they had lived. Dan Healy was remembered not just as a warrior, but as a loving husband and a devoted father to his 2 children. He was a man who could lead a team of elite operators into combat and then come home and be a gentle, playful dad. This duality, this ability to be both a hardened warrior and a compassionate human being, is perhaps the truest measure of a man. A close friend and fellow SEAL shared a memory that captures the essence of Dan Healy's character. He recalled how Dan, a senior chief, would always take the time to mentor the younger SEALs, to share his knowledge and experience without a hint of arrogance. He led from the front, but he also nurtured the men under his command. He understood that the strength of the SEALs was not just in their physical prowess, but in their unbreakable bond. It was this bond that had compelled him to board Turbine 33 without a moment's hesitation. The aftermath of Operation Red Wings was a period of intense scrutiny and soul-searching for the U.S. military. The loss of so many elite operators in a single mission raised difficult questions. Was the mission ill-conceived? Was the intelligence faulty? Were crucial corners cut in the planning and execution? These are not easy questions to answer, and they form the basis of a historical debate that continues to this day. One of the central controversies revolves around the decision to launch the Quick Reaction Force in broad daylight into a known hot landing zone. Military doctrine generally favors nighttime operations for special forces, using the cover of darkness to maintain the element of surprise and mitigate risk. The decision to send Turbine 33 in during the day, while understandable given the desperation of the situation, has been a focal point of criticism. Some have argued that it was a fatal error, a violation of standard operating procedure that put the rescue team in an untenable position. Others defend the decision, framing it as a tragic but necessary gamble. The men on the ground were about to be overrun. Waiting for nightfall might have meant there would be no one left to rescue. The commanders on the ground were faced with an impossible choice: a classic fog of war scenario where decisions must be made in seconds with incomplete information and immense pressure. From this perspective, the loss of Turbine 33 was not the result of incompetence, but a testament to the brutal realities of combat and the inherent risks of special operations. There is also the matter of the rules of engagement, the very thing that led to the initial SEAL team being compromised. The decision by Lieutenant Murphy and his men to release the goat herders, a decision that almost certainly sealed their fate, has been both praised as a moral and honorable act and criticized as a tactical blunder. This dilemma highlights the incredible complexity of modern asymmetric warfare, where the lines between combatant and non-combatant are often blurred, and where soldiers are forced to make life or death decisions that have both tactical and ethical dimensions. Had they executed the civilians, they might have survived, but they would have had to live with that choice for the rest of their lives. In choosing the path of moral courage, they accepted a greater risk. It's a choice that speaks to the character of the men involved, but it also raises unsettling questions about the nature of the conflicts we ask our soldiers to fight. For the families of the fallen, these debates can be agonizing. They are often left to grapple not only with their personal grief, but with the public narratives and controversies that surround their loved ones' final moments. They hear the critiques and the what-ifs, and it can add a layer of complexity to an already unbearable loss. In the case of Dan Healy, the story is one of unhesitating courage in the face of these complexities. He wasn't in a position to debate the grand strategy of the war or the nuances of the rules of engagement. His role, his duty was clear and immediate: rescue his brothers. His actions were not born of a flawed plan, but of a deeply ingrained ethos. The SEAL Creed states, "I will not fail my teammates." Dan Healy lived that creed until his very last breath. The story of Turbine 33 is a powerful and painful reminder that even the most elite, well-trained forces are not invincible. It underscores the fact that in war, the enemy gets a vote, and sometimes, despite the best training, the best technology, and the bravest hearts, the outcome is tragic. The loss of Dan Healy and the other men on that helicopter was not a failure of their courage or their skill. It was a failure of circumstance, a perfect storm of bad luck and enemy action that converged on a single point on a remote mountainside. It's a truth that offers little comfort, but one that is essential to understanding the full scope of their sacrifice. The immediate consequence was, of course, a profound sense of loss. The Naval Special Warfare community is a small, tight-knit family. The loss of 11 of their own in a single day was a blow of almost unimaginable proportions. It forced a period of introspection, a reevaluation of tactics, and a reinforcement of the support systems for the families of the fallen. The military learned hard lessons that day, lessons paid for in blood, which would go on to inform future operations and hopefully save lives. For his extraordinary heroism and selfless dedication, Senior Chief Daniel Healy was posthumously awarded the Bronze Star Medal with Valor, the Purple Heart, and the Combat Action Ribbon. These medals, while symbols of a grateful nation, can only hint at the depth of his sacrifice. His true legacy lives on in other, more personal ways. It lives on in the memories of his family, in the stories told by his teammates, and in the lives of the young SEALs he mentored. There is no grand, complex moral to his story. There is instead a simple, profound truth. It's the truth that lives in the heart of every soldier who has ever answered the call to rescue a comrade. It's the truth that says, "You are my brother and I am coming for you." It's a truth that asks for nothing in return and is prepared to